Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Celtic Way. I am your host, John McGinley. I'm joined by Ryan McGinley. We're here to chat through all the latest Celtic news and events. And listen, we'll be going through some of the minutes from the fans' meeting shortly. But first, a word from our sponsors. Located in Hillington, Glasgow, it's Simply Furniture, an independent brand dedicated to bringing luxury and contemporary style into homes across the UK. From elegant sofas to statement dining sets, their handpicked collections offer exceptional value without compromising on style. They have a dedicated team to ensure your furniture is delivered with care right to your doorstep. And if you want to see the range up close, you can visit their showroom and mention the Celtic Way for a special in-store discount with links below. Ryan, how are you doing this Friday morning? I'm assuming you were watching the Scotland game last night. Any thoughts on that before we get started here?
Not a pretty watch by any means. I can't remember the last time I watched a decent game of football, to be honest with you, when it comes to combining the way Scotland played last night and the way that Celtic played, or the way that Celtic have been playing recently. But it doesn't matter how you play as long as you win games, and in Cup qualifying, the most important thing is to win. And Scotland did that. They went behind and then responded almost immediately through Ryan Christie, and then Lewis Ferguson and Lyndon Dyche scored to make it 3-1 on the night. So a massive result for Scotland. A win against Belarus would pretty much almost guarantee them a playoff spot in the World Cup qualifying. So there's plenty to look forward to with that. Wasn't the best game to watch, but Scotland and Steve Clarke got the job done, and both Kieran Tierney and Anthony Ralston came on late to help secure the win for Scotland.
Yeah, they came on as substitutes. Kasper Schmeichel also involved in World Cup qualification last night, keeping another clean sheet against Belarus in a dominant Denmark victory away from home. So he's in contention to reach the World Cup too. We know Daisuke is also away with Japan at the moment. It looks like he's missed out on their match against Paraguay with a slight foot complaint, but I'm not expecting that to be too serious, Ryan. The word is that he may be able to feature for their game against Brazil. I know Japan always value their friendlies against Brazil over the years, and that's kind of a big occasion for them. So I would expect Maeda to be involved in some capacity for that one. I don't think we have to be too worried about a long-term injury.
Yeah, the fact that he wasn't sent home by Japan would indicate that he still has a part to play in international football in this window, which is really, really good to see. Yeah, he'll be desperate to play against Brazil, and hopefully he can do that. Both he and Real Sociedad's Kubo, one of them trained individually, one of them didn't train at all. Kubo trained individually, and Dais Maeda sat out. There was pictures of him speaking with Moriyasu during the open training session that was available to the media. So hopefully it's not too serious and he can get back and play some part in that game against Brazil, but more importantly play for Celtic in the upcoming fixtures, because he's still a key player for Brendan Rodgers.
Sadly, Liam Scales also had to withdraw from Republic of Ireland due to a family bereavement, so we wish Liam Scales all the best, and his family all the best, of course, with that. It's expected Liam Scales is also going to be back for their second game of the international break, so best wishes to Liam Scales. That's all we'll really say on that. I think that's about it for in terms of an international roundup. I know you and Josh looked at some of the youths yesterday. There was a contingent of youth players at Lennoxtown this week, just going through a bit of training. I think they were getting some talks, and Sean Maloney was there. I believe Paul Tisdale was there as well, chatting to them. So there's been a wee bit of going on around the youth this week as well. But our focus today is going to be returning to the Celtic fans meeting on Monday. Now, you may be asking, well, what's the point of that? I know you talked about it the other day. Well, the meetings have been released in terms of the full scope of the conversation between Michael Nicholson, Chris Mackay, other senior Celtic officials, and a variety of Celtic fan organisations as well. I think there was 8 in total, or 9 in total if you include the collective. So it was a fairly robust discussion, or at least robust questioning. I wouldn't really describe the answers as robust, Ryan. We'll get into it in a minute. Now, first of all, we can't go through the entire meeting because it's a very lengthy document. It takes a while to read, and it would be a waste of your time and our time to try and just go through every single sentence of the thing. What I've tried to do is pick out some highlights, everyone, that we can go through. What I would say is the fact these minutes have been released, it's very important that supporters make up their own mind on this. So we are what we present today is through our filter, of course. We'll try to be as informative as possible and bring balance, but every supporter will think differently about the minutes, and that's important to note. And you can read them in full if you go to CelticFC.com, the official Celtic website. They have released the minutes. Now, crucially, the minutes were agreed by Celtic and all the fan organisations who were at the meeting. So there's no dispute about the minutes. So everything we offered here has been released by Celtic. So this is not a biased account of what occurred at the meeting. So that's important to know as well, because there is some stuff in there that you might raise your eyebrows. Mark McQueen asking, did you read the full thing? Yeah, of course. I've read the full thing. Ryan's read the full thing. We have gone through it all. And as I say, we've picked out some highlights, or not highlights, but just some of them maybe more newsworthy stuff, or some of the more questionable responses for discussion and for presentation today as well. So we'll bring up a few as we go through. The first question, first of all, it's important to note that a lot of the questions revolved around the 7 questions that were also in the open letter that fan organisations signed to the Celtic board last month. Now, Celtic had varying time for some of these questions. The first one was, what is the club's long-term strategy, and when and how will this be communicated to supporters? Now, Michael Nicholson said, that their strategy is clear, and it's kind of the soundbite that they always give. They aim to be a world-class football club in everything they do. This includes success through dominating in Scotland and competing in the UEFA Champions League based on the creation of Champions League players through the academy, player recruitment, player trading, technical functions, and development of training facilities. Now, again, you'll note that's nothing really new from the club. That's nothing that they haven't said before or that they haven't trumpeted before. When you see initials in the quotes I'm presenting, such as MN, there was the minutes way of shortening everyone's name. So MN, of course, means Michael Nicholson. So Nicholson further noted that this strategy is communicated via the club's annual report, the fans forum, adding that the club's head of football operations, Paul Tisdale, has presented to the fan forum on football operations through ongoing dialogue with supporters groups and in part through the club's statement on the 7th of September. So before I get Ryan's thoughts on this, just a bit of context for the way that the club are saying this strategy is communicated, because again, I think this is important to note. First of all, the club statement on the 7th of September, I think that was widely panned. I think referring to that as meaningful communication for the club is a stretch from Celtic, from my perspective. The club's annual report, again, you don't find much depth in there, everyone. It's mainly the sound bites that they're talking about, the creation of Champions League players. There's no real depth on how they go about it. In terms of Paul Tisdale presenting to the fans forum, again, that's important to note that Celtic didn't upload the minutes for these fan forums from, I think, 3 of them until very, very recently. The one Paul Tisdale went to was in May, but all Celtic released from that was a bullet point of the presentation he gave to supporters on the night. So, there was no real detail to the wider support about what the functions of his role is or what he aims to do. So, again, I just think that's clear to note, because Michael Nicholson's referring to this communication strategy that they've got, and really, if you look at what they have released or what they have said in these various branches, not a lot of note that has to be said. So, Ryan, what do you make of the response to that question? They did go into a bit more, but again, as I say, there was no real depth or insight from the club on what they go about or what their long-term football strategy is beyond the sound bites. That's my perspective anyway. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, it's all good to say these things, but it doesn't seem as if the club is succeeding in a lot of those points that they made as well. That yes, they have dominated in Scotland recently. That is true, but the Champions League football, that's been as a result of being champions. But the fact is, once you bring in qualifying, that's when the hurdles seem to come up. There just seems to be, there doesn't seem to be, there clearly is a lack of communication. The fact that they're pointing you towards the fact that Paul Tisdale's had these, not PowerPoints, but these presentations, but you can't access them, you can't publicly access them, or the full minutes, just shows that it's the complete opposite. It's a complete lack of communication from the club. The whole minutes, it's a lot to read. There is a lot to go through in that, and I'm glad we're not going through the whole thing, because we'd be here until probably next week with all of the things that have been documented on that. But I just think in general the club has a severe communication problem between themselves and the supporters. While I'm glad that the minutes are out, I think they have put a spotlight into certain areas, and how certain areas are just not fit for purpose, unfortunately, when it comes to the hierarchy of the football club, and maybe even lower than that in some of the other sectors of the club too. So yeah, would you be able to bring up that slide again, just
Yeah, of
to see
course.
all the
Yeah.
different points? Yeah, if you go through that based on the creation of Champions League players through the academy, Josh and I were speaking about that yesterday. How many Champions League players have Celtic created recently? You know, I
It's
get
my
the
it's
Kieran
my
Tierney's.
understanding that the last player to have started 5 or more matches in the Champions League, whether qualifying or the group stages, was Anthony Ralston, and he made his Champions League debut in 2018, I think, 7 years ago. So that's your answer to
7 years,
that one,
yeah,
Ryan.
yeah, and you've of course you've got Cal McGregor and Kieran Tierney. Kieran Tierney left. Cal McGregor's been the captain for a number of years. So apart from those players, you know, Celtic are clearly failing, and that and one of their key objectives, which is to create Champions League players through the academy. The academy players just don't play in the Champions League, unfortunately, for Celtic, because whether they're not trusted, they're not good enough, whether Celtic don't create enough of them to actually play first team football for the club and then to move on to European football. Yeah, there's a real. I think in terms of their long term footballing strategy and the short term at the moment, it's not working.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And just listen, just on the Paul Tisdale thing, before we move on to other aspects of this meeting, this was the presentation that Paul Tisdale gave to supporters at the Fans Forum in May. So essentially, he outlined his journey to Celtic. He talked about talent identification and development at Celtic, developing Champions League players, the fundamentals of a sustainable football club, the challenges around data and football. I think that would be very interesting for supporters. Key objectives of the academy, day-to-day processes and functions, his preliminary focus just in initially coming into the role, and what his next steps were going to be. Again, in terms of recruitment overview, defining Celtic's playing model. I mean, again, Celtic fans would be very interested to hear that communicated from the head of football operations, I would believe, using this to build processes for recruitment and managing lines of appropriate communication. Now, that sounds all very interesting and relevant to Celtic supporters for me, and I'm glad that he gave that presentation to the fan forum. But what is stopping Celtic from getting Paul Tisdale in an interview on camera to discuss this stuff that he's clearly comfortable talking about? None of this is secret, confidential information. This is stuff that is interesting and gives an insight into the role and might, educate people on what actually goes on behind the scenes at Celtic, what Paul Tisdale's role is, instead of all this kind of cloak and dagger stuff around recruitment at Celtic. I don't know about you, Ryan, but I think that kind of thing, this is the kind of thing that I feel like should be communicated to supporters, the wider Celtic support, on a more regular basis.
See, as soon as Paul Tisdale was handed the job on a permanent basis, that should have been the case. I understand why they wouldn't do it on a consultancy basis when he worked with Brendan Rodgers during that summer last year. But as soon as he became a permanent member of Celtic staff, I think it's just required that he would sit in front of a camera and outline his objectives in that new role. You know, it's a newly built role for the club. I think it's important that supporters know what that role entails. You know, you list all those bullet points there. His journey to Celtic. I'd like to hear about his journey to Celtic. I'd like to hear what he's done to get to this point, to be not to be handed the job, but how he's earned that job with what he's done in football. You know, the day-to-day practices. I want to know what the day-to-day practices are within the academy. These would be good things to hear, and they would really bridge a gap of communication. As much as we talk about the communication between the supporters and the club, or the club and the supporters being fractured, there are ways to go about it that you can fix it slowly but surely. And having these sort of branches and these methods of communication could help that divide become, a little bit better than what it is just now.
Okay, so what did the club say in the transfer window? They accepted that the transfer window did not go right, and that there were failings. Now, in response to that, they said that there's something that they continually assess but cannot share publicly. They feel that they've invested players in the short, medium and long term. When asked if the club had identified what went wrong during the summer transfer window, which again Michael Nicholson did note that it had, and that they take responsibility that they hadn't met all their aims of the transfer window. Nicholson said that there was an internal process of review ongoing, which will focus on when what right and what wrong, and examining this against relevant factors, citing players' personal career objectives, the selling and buying clubs' aims, agents, taxation. Belgium and Germany tax systems were compared with UK as examples of the variables at play, amongst others. Now, crucially, they didn't commit to releasing this information to supporters. They talked about confidentiality and that they would never release anything that's critical of individuals to the public, which you can take as you will. They're very much relying, as we spoke about the other day, on this internal review process and taking learnings from that. So, listen, I think... you can make up your own mind about whether that's prudent of the club. They were asked whether they could give a kind of summary of their findings. Again, I don't think there's an expectation from the supporters, from the Celtic collective, or anyone in our live chat, or ourselves, or anyone, for Celtic to be releasing a blow-by-blow account of exactly what went wrong and who was culpable as an individual. They were asked whether they could give a broad summary, and they didn't commit to it. They just said they were continuing to review their club communication and engagement processes. I think the fact they haven't committed to it suggests that they won't be releasing anything, because even stuff that they've committed to releasing in the past, they have never released. So the expectation is pretty light on that one for me, Ryan. Just on transfer processes, they were asked to confirm who's responsible for conducting football transfers, including if the Chief Executive and the Chief Financial Officer, Chris Mackay, were directly involved. Supporter groups also sought confirmation as who values players and agrees commercial terms. Chris Mackay, who is the Chief Financial Officer, explained that a multidisciplinary approach is taken. This approach is led by the football department, who identify players, with the executive team concluding transactions. This was noted by Michael Nicholson as not being unusual within football clubs. It was asked if the football manager sanctioned all signings. Michael Nicholson confirmed that he did. Another fan asked why the manager referred to some signings as club signings, which you'll remember was a line from Rodgers consistently throughout the summer window. In response to that, Michael Nicholson didn't have anything to say. Michael Nicholson shrugged his shoulders. Now, again, this isn't a biased account of what went down in the meeting. These are the minutes released by Celtic Football Club. I think Celtic releasing minutes of this kind and in response to an important question, Michael Nicholson is shrugging his shoulders, I think tells you a lot. It doesn't reflect well on Michael Nicholson in a position of power such as a chief executive for me, Ryan. I don't know about you.
No, I don't think the meeting or the minutes from the meeting did. I don't think they've helped his case whatsoever, and I think that any protests that will go on now, or a lot of the protests that will go on now, will be maybe not aimed at him, but he'll take a centre stage in all of this after these meeting minutes were published. That was the main soundbite or the main headline that came from this. People were all over this on social media last night. They shrugged his shoulders. Just hearing about everybody knows that the transfer window was largely a failure for Celtic. Yes, they did get some right in the end, and you've got to give them at least some credit for some of the signings that they made, despite how late some of them were, and and other factors. But
I mean, the jury's out on all the signings for me, Ryan. I don't think anyone's standing out as I'm honestly, I don't think. I think there's still a lot to prove for all of the summer contingent, the players that came in. So
some
I don't
have
know.
Done better
maybe
than
for
others.
me, I just think giving the board credit for this year's signings is maybe a bit premature.
That is completely fair enough. I'm just going on what I've seen so far from some of the players, and not all of them have. Maybe it's me just trying to be a little bit optimistic about things, but you've got to be realistic in things like this. And the meeting, the minutes from the meeting in Michael Nicholson's case, I think that just about sums it all up. The shrugging of his shoulders, that just shows a disconnect between the executives and the manager as well, because the manager's saying that there are club signings, and then the executives, or Michael Nicholson, the spokesperson, the chief executive, is saying that no every signing is signed off by the manager. That clearly indicates that there's a divide between the two, and that's quite concerning, because if Brendan Rodgers is making statements like that in the media and Michael Nicholson's saying something different, it doesn't bode well for the synergy between the two.
Response to one of the questions was, how do you intend to modernise the club's structure to compete in Europe, and why are we consistently unprepared for qualification stages? A reminder, the context behind this question is that 7 out of the last 9 attempts Celtic have attempted to qualify for the Champions League through the qualification process, Celtic have been knocked out of qualification by clubs with fewer resources and who weren't seeded in the process as Celtic were. So Michael Nicholson's response to that question, he stated that the club did not accept the premise of the question, which again, I think sums things up. Again, this is not a cherry-picked quote. This is the initial response to the question as detailed in the minutes. He further noted that the club had appointed Paul Tisdale as head of football operations, a new position for the club, which you can argue to a degree. I'm assuming it is to an extent, but there's been similar people in a similar role in recent years. I think Paul Tisdale maybe has a slightly wider remit than the likes of Mark Lawwell and Lee Congerton, but essentially he's there as a recruitment guy, it seems to me. He also cited the creation of a professional pathway manager. Darren Reed was in the position, and now Sean Maloney is, of course, as well. So again, people can make up your own mind about Michael Nicholson's response to that question. He did cite the success of Celtic in Europe is determined that they've qualified for the group stages of a European competition in 19 out of the last 20 seasons. That is a quote from Michael Nicholson. He's including the Europa League in that, of course, and again, you can determine whether that is deemed as successful or not. You can make up your own mind on that. I mean, I think we'll just leave that one there. Nicholson stated that the club did not accept the premise of the question. I don't really think it needs further explanation, Ryan.
No, absolutely not. If you can't accept that, then I don't know what to say, to be honest, because they're clearly not prepared for in the modernisation. I don't think they deserve a pat on the back for creating these new fancy roles, because so many other clubs have these roles. They have pathway managers. They've had pathway managers for years and years. The fact, I would just say that Celtic are late to the party more than anything else when it comes to the making or the developing of these new roles within the team. They should have been there for years prior, so they don't deserve a pat on the back for saying that these roles are now available and they're now employable in that role.
Yep, on the Celtic fan survey, you remember the big fan survey they conducted in the summer of 2024, and they were asked about the timelines of publication. They confirmed that the report outlining the outputs of the survey will be released by the club soon, noting that key issues which the club wishes to consult on further included support, engagement and safe standing. Supporters expressed concern that the delay undermines transparency and accountability. Then the club indicated that the survey would be published this month in October. So again, that's something they've committed to, so keep an eye on whether they do that or not. Obviously, there's been a long delay with this, so we await the results of the fan survey and what that says. On the recruitment of Paul Tisdale, Chris Mackay confirmed that the club spoke with several candidates, but that no external recruitment consultancy had been appointed. Michael Nicholson confirmed there was no family or business connection between the current head of football operations or any Celtic board members, but that individuals had crossed paths previously. I think this is in reference to the fact that Dermot Desmond knew Paul Tisdale through some of his golfing buddies. That's been some of the rumours doing the rounds of late. But they're confirmed there's no family or business connection between anyone. Michael Nicholson confirmed that the manager supported the recruitment of Paul Tisdale following a consultancy period last summer. Chris Mackay said that Paul Tisdale had worked on a project in which he analysed the club's game model with a view to mapping the club's playing style and system, with a view to using data-driven results to identify players who fit the club's model. Again, just a little bit of insight on how they went about that. So apparently they did interview other people for this role, and yeah, again, you can take that as it is. Just on the briefing against Brendan Rodgers, another hot point of contention of late. Chris Mackay said all board members had been asked about the article and that there was no basis for further investigation. This is of course the article that appeared in the Scottish Sun, of citing a senior source at Celtic who was essentially briefing against Brendan Rodgers and saying that Brendan Rodgers was tearing the club apart, I think was the quote used. Chris Mackay also mentioned that the newspaper source was a senior figure, which may not necessarily have been a board member. The football manager confirmed that the matter was closed in his next press conference. Michael Nicholson noted that the board understands the importance of confidentiality. When asked why the club had not taken legal action against the newspaper, Michael Nicholson confirmed that the club would not take legal action, and said that the club was busy enough as it is. The supporter reps at the meeting said that this approach was dismissive of a concern of fans. Again, this is stuff you can make your own mind up, everyone. I mean, it's not for me to tip the scales on how you feel about that. I can understand to an extent Celtic wanting to move on from this because I think it was a pretty damaging episode all in, and they don't want to dwell on it. But I think the idea that, again, when Brendan Rodgers speaks publicly about it, it gets to the stage where that's maybe where more communication is needed on it, Ryan.
Yeah, it's just that. It's just a bit of a mess, all in all. Would you be able to just repeat that question? Sorry, there was a wee bit of noise in the background.
Yeah, no. I was just wanting to really get your thoughts on kind of that situation and
Yeah, the
briefing against Brendan Rodgers and when Brendan Rodgers speaks about this publicly, that kind of surely triggers that there should be better communication from the club on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really serious issue, and even though the football managers confirmed that the matter was closed, and I understand confidentiality and all of that, but it was a serious, there was serious points made in that article, and the fact that the club then go on to say in the meeting minutes that they were busy enough, as it is, it's almost dismissive of the whole situation, which is really. It was a real talking point for a number of days, and going into the manager's press conference, a lot of people were talking about what Brendan Rodgers would say about that, and he was passionate about it in his press conference. So I don't know. Just the whole tone of the minutes and the meeting, it's just so dismissive of certain questions and you can understand why the collective and the wider fan base, once the summary came out, that initial summary came out after the meeting, you can tell why so many fans rolled their eyes when they read it, because that just seems to be the attitude that went into that meeting amongst the Celtic hierarchy. So for me, it's I think they've got to take those accusations more seriously, especially when it's been reported in a national newspaper, and it did catch fire and loads of people were talking about it. Everybody worth their salt was asked about the situation as well. So yeah, it's just that dismissive tone that really will irk a lot of people, and it irked me when I read it as well. So
yeah. Just another point coming out of the minutes where this concept of a fan advisory board. I went a bit in depth on this with Hamish on the weekly show that we put out on Wednesday, and I kind of spoke about that this is going to be a goal of the collective, and I actually said on that the some people within the club feel that it's a good idea. Obviously that whether everyone feels it's a good idea, I don't know. They did confirm, the club confirmed that this is something that they're aware of and have been considering. The supporters requested a clear timeline. The club said they would come back on this point. The club also spoke about that they're exploring the models that are in use in other clubs, including in England. I think they cited the Manchester United Fan Advisory Board as something they're looking into. And they're looking into how the structure of that would look like, how it would function, and what its role within or in conjunction with the Celtic board would be. So I think this is something that the club are genuinely working on. I don't know how seriously they're taking it, but as I said, I do know that there is some people inside Celtic who are in favour of this and see it as a good step forward. A lot of this is to play out, but I think this would be a natural conclusion, or not conclusion, but this would be a natural outcome of what the Celtic Fans Collective is doing. And listen, these fans advisory boards, they don't fix anything in their own right. But as Paul Quigley said, one of the Celtic representatives, he suggested it would allow for fan representatives within the club and facilitate two-way consultation. And I think that's important. I think it's quite important to have a formal body, a formal fan body that can act as almost a go-between between the wider support and the club. It doesn't exist at the moment. These fan forum things that the club are conducting aren't really fit for purpose when they conduct the meetings and they don't release the minutes for months, genuinely months. Three fan forum meetings had gone by without Celtic uploading the minutes, which I don't think is good enough. Frankly, so I'm pretty in favour of a fan advisory board. Again, this is a normal thing in football. Clubs across Scotland and England have this in place, so I think this might be an important step forward, and I was pleased to hear that the club would be considering it.
Yeah, and if that's one thing that can come from these discussions between the board and the fans, then I would be all for that. It's a little bit surprising, or in some cases unsurprising, that this isn't already in practice. They would be, again, they'd be late to the party, because you mentioned examples such as Manchester United down south, where fan advisory boards do exist, or some iteration of that do exist. But we're coming from a place where it would be a good place to start for Celtic, and the fact that they're open to this and they seem to be doing their work on this in the background is a positive, and it has to be taken as such. Any form of any board or any method of communication that can improve communication between the board and the fans can only be seen as a positive thing, because there is a real disconnect between those two parties. It's shown in the minutes of the meeting, and if they've got something like that can meet in the middle and can act as the sort of middle point for the two, then I would be all for that. That sounds like a positive that could be feasible in this current climate, which is good.
It's important to note that it wouldn't just be a go-between between the people at this meeting and protesters in the club. That's not what it would be. It's for the wider support. It's for every Celtic fan. It's important to note that it wouldn't just be between those two parties there. Yeah, and I guess what is underlined for me throughout the minutes of the meeting, and again, you can read them in full on the official Celtic website, so please go and do that if you're interested in more. I think the message coming through from all of this from the club is that they're still not really taking any of this seriously in terms of a substantive change process, I think they're still, as been alluded to through some of their answers here, but also in the wider minutes, is that they feel it's more of a communications issue, which I think is a bit of a red herring, and actually I'm hoping that the conversation moves away from that from some of the protesters. A lot of talks about the club communication is rubbish. We know it is, and I know we've spoken a bit about it today, but it really goes far beyond that. It goes about what the club are willing to do in terms of substantive change. And listen, I think the key thing for me was this one, where how do you intend to modernise the club structure to compete in Europe, and why are we consistently unprepared for qualification stages? I think that's a very fair question, rooted in reality, rooted in evidence, rooted in what the existing structure of the club looks like. I think it's a very fair question, and I would expect a club of Celtic stature and their turnover and the executive team they have in place, which is numerous, and the people they have in charge, I would expect them to have a better answer to this question. I don't think it's good enough for Michael Nicholson to state that the club did not accept the premise of this question, because I think it's a very fair question, and I think they should have had something better lined up for that. And to me, that sums up the whole endeavour for me, in that I feel like Celtic didn't go into this meeting well prepared enough, or in enough of good faith to seriously address the questions that were put forward by an open letter that was signed by 420 fan organisations that represented thousands of Celtic fans. I think they need to take it more seriously. And listen, there's one thing, I think it's natural in football for a supporter base to be not entirely aligned with the board of a football club. I don't think that's necessarily unique to Celtic. I think you see it at various clubs across Europe and the world, really. I think what happens, though, is when you have that disconnect and you also have a dismissive tone to the disconnect, I think that's when it starts to cause problems in terms of the risk of future revenue and essentially switching supporters off to what the product you're offering is. I think it's, in a sense, that, as I said, the disconnect's natural. It's how you engage with that disconnect, and it's how you put across your point of view and put across your structures, and keep an open mind with regard to is a different structure a better way forward at Celtic? Should Celtic have a dedicated sporting director with a football budget in place? Would that solve anything? If not, tell us why not. Tell us your point of view. I just think at the moment they're just quite dismissive. They're talking about internal reviews, confidentiality. There's little information coming out of the club, and I just don't think that's really fit for purpose. When, as I've said before, Celtic fans generate the vast majority of the income that flows into Celtic Football Club on an annual basis, and I think they're at serious risk of switching that revenue off to a degree. Now, I don't think it'll go away entirely. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think Celtic fans are about to abandon the club in droves, and I actually don't foresee boycotts working down at this point. I think there was there was maybe a moment just after the transfer window where a call for a boycott may have picked up steam. I don't think it would at this point, frankly. But it doesn't need to be a boycott, I think, to harm the club in terms of financially being supported by the supporters, because I think a lot of people are just turned off, not just by the disconnect, but by Celtic's attitude to the disconnect, Ryan.
Yep, I completely agree with everything that you've said there. I think just in general, when it comes to boards and fan bases, just across football, there aren't a lot of similarities between the fans and the boards. It's very rare that you get that amazing relationship between a board and its fans. It's quite rare in football, especially in modern days. In the modern day, when so much money is going around in football, different owners from different places. But you're just hoping for better than what is here just now. And from reading those comments that Michael Nicholson, Chris Mackay, etc. said, they just sounded like excuses as to why Celtic wouldn't change and become a better outfit. At the end of the day, and this was something that was mentioned in the statement accompanying the minutes of the meeting, everybody wants Celtic to be a better football team. They want them to be the best that they can be. And that is true. The fans that were present at that meeting want the same as us, as you and I, as everybody, people covering Celtic, people supporting Celtic, everybody in between. Unfortunately, you know, it just seems at the moment that Celtic aren't the best they can be. So the board really should be more, in my opinion anyway, they should be more open to making changes in order to get the best out of Celtic. Because I think we all know that Celtic could be better than what they are just now. We know that they can be better, especially with the reserves of cash that they have just now in certain areas, particularly in the transfer market, but in other areas too. Communication does come into it as well. And I think, just on your point in communication is just one part of it. I think there's a lot of areas not working. So just putting all of the blame on a lack of communication, I agree with you. It doesn't wash, because I think that there's deeper issues at play when it comes to Celtic, and they've got to be ironed out. But it was an eye opener reading those minutes of the meeting yesterday. It gave you a real insight into how the Celtic board view certain things, and we'll see what happens moving forward. But I can now fully understand the tone of the Celtic fans collective once they came back from that meeting, why that statement was the way it was.
The statement they released was put into dispute by the statement that Celtic later released, but I think if you go back and read the Celtic Fans Collective statement on this meeting, I think it's a fairly accurate summary of what transpired. And actually, I think Celtic trying to spin this as some sort of positive engagement with supporters, again, I think missed the mark. And I think obviously they're going to try and come out of the meeting from their perspective and try to spin it in a good light. But for me, that just sums up, there's too much spin coming out from Celtic. There's too much trying to cover themselves or spin their point of view to the extent that it's just dressed up in PR language and kind of business speak, and doesn't really, there's no truth to, or it doesn't feel like there's truth to anything that Celtic present in terms of how it feels to supporters. You know, it doesn't speak to supporters in a way that engages them or makes them, or gives them comfort or gives them trust. It's an erosion of trust at the end of the day. And listen, I said this before, but Celtic may well feel aggrieved that there has been, you know, the club may have the stance that trust has been eroded under, you know, pretenses that has been influenced by the media or by other people or by supporters groups, and that they are they're just trying to do their best for the club. But you know, whether they feel like that or not, I think is irrelevant. I think it's undeniable at this point that the trust is eroded to a degree that is no longer viable. And it's on Celtic, the onus is on them to rebuild that trust. So they now have to go above and beyond to rebuild that trust with supporters, because whether they feel aggrieved or not, I don't think they can deny either that the trust has disappeared.
Yeah, and just on the trust, I think it goes to the bottom line, which is results in the football part, particularly in Europe. A lot of people just watch Celtic at face value. They'll see the results and they'll be like, Celtic aren't being represented. They look at the transfers, then they look at what happens on the park, and that trust will be eroded just by the way that Celtic play or by the results that Celtic get, particularly in Europe, but also in domestic cups too. Recently, they'll look at that and think that Celtic could be doing more in that. Yeah, I think some of the rhetoric that the board have used, it just won't wash with supporters anymore. I don't think it washed with supporters before, but now I think we're past that point of fans just accepting that this is the way it's going to be, and that's the reason why you're seeing protests, because fans just want something different now. They're tired of hearing the same old tropes, because there are similarities in the way that Celtic do statements and the way that they write their statements. I think the fans in general, and I don't want to speak for all the fans, and I would never say that I speak for all the fans, but a lot of the fans want just something different. They've heard this story too many times. It's a bit of a rinse and repeat methodology, and they just want something different, and they hope that they can push that through protests, which I expect to happen now because of that.
Someone at Celtic needs to take the handcuffs off the media team within the club and get cameras and get the executive team in front of cameras, get Paul Tisdale in front of a camera, explain to supporters what is happening at the club. This reliance on minutes and WhatsApp rumours and God knows what else, minutes from somebody, bullet point minutes from a meeting that took place 6 months ago as evidence that you've communicated your strategy to the support, I think is totally absurd. And I think Celtic need to get a grip here and come into the modern age and realise that open and transparent communication is the way to deal with a customer base, which they see the support as, obviously. It's not even about
transparent.
Yeah, being transparent. It's not even about the emotion of being a football fan. Just from a purely business to customer, a business to customer pipeline, Celtic are badly failing their customers at the moment.
Yeah, and people will get sick and tired, and people have get sick and tired of that. They're tired of being treated like children when it comes to statements about, oh, you don't know this and that about the football club. We'll tell you the answers, and you just go with that party answer, essentially. I think the time for that is past now. Celtic have got to be more open with their supporters. This is as much as it was a starting point, this meeting between the supporters, I'm hoping that there's more. I'll wait and see on that regard if there's going to be more. Celtic have said that they're open to more communication, but they need to come, as we made the point earlier on in the week, they need to come back to the table with solutions rather than excuses.
Yeah, and that's key. It needs to be tangible. And listen, I think we can tell from the meeting minutes that Celtic aren't for changing anytime soon. They're not going to make substantial changes to the processes at Celtic right now. That's pretty clear, I think, from the minutes, both that we've talked about today, but also in the wider minutes. They accept that the transfer window didn't go the way that they wanted it to, but they're essentially saying the structure of the club's fine. They're happy with how they deal with transfers. They're happy with the fact that a variety of unnamed and non-executive directors sign off on the transfers above a certain value. To the degree that is normal in football, but I think it's also normal that, or increasingly normal across the continent, that people are given a budget that they can then work with without having to have the full oversight on a day-to-day basis of non-executive directors at a football club. And listen, the big thing for me as well, and I said this on the video with Hamish, is that Dermot Desmond's not named at all at once in these meeting minutes. Now, I'm not suggesting Dermot Desmond's involved in Celtic on a day-to-day basis in terms of the functioning of the business as a club, but we know he has a big say in a lot of important things around the club. And I think this almost treating Dermot Desmond as some sort of person you shall not name, I don't think is really conducive to I don't think it serves the interests of the collective either to kind of avoid Dermot Desmond to this degree, because I agree he's one of many issues at Celtic, but I think Dermot Desmond's role needs to be examined by more supporters, and frankly we need to hear what Michael Nicholson does say about Dermot Desmond. Whether it's a soundbite answer, a PR answer, of course it's going to be, but I think that just needs to be aired, and I think that I would expect more from the collective, I think, if they want to progress to kind of talk about Dermot Desmond more, frankly.
Yeah, I think it was a missed opportunity to ask about that. I think that's maybe one of the misfires of now that we know how the meeting transpired in full, the fact that there was no real mention, I don't think there was any mention at all in the notes of Dermot Desmond. It's almost as if it's the elephant in the room that no one speaks about, but he's the largest shareholder of the club. He does hold a lot of power and among the club, and you'd like to. I think that's, for me, that would be one of my main objectives if you were going into one of these meetings, to understand how much of a say Dermot Desmond has on the workings of the club. Despite not turning up for AGM meetings. He's always got somebody there in his place. How much power does he have from quite far away? And what is the long-term plan for Celtic with Dermot Desmond having all that power at the club? That would be one of my areas I would want to delve deeper into. But maybe that's a question for another meeting, I guess.
Yeah, Thomas saying Peter Lawwell is the only non-executive director. That's not the case. Celtic have 6 of them. The executive directors are Michael Nicholson and Chris Mackay. The non-executive directors at Celtic are Peter Lawwell, the chairman, but also Thomas Allison, Sharon Brown, Dermot Desmond, as we just said, and Brian Wilson and Brian Rose. So that makes up the rest of the Celtic board. So just wanted to clear that up. I think in reference to non-executive directors signing off on spending at a certain level, although he's not named in the minutes, I believe that is in reference to Dermot Desmond. But as I say, when it's not named and it's just talking about the collective of non-executive directors. And listen, I get it. I think the collective laid out at some point. I've seen communication from them. I can't remember where it was exactly, but they were essentially saying that Dermot Desmond is almost an untouchable figure, and so they're focused on more direct, shorter term change at Celtic, and that addressing Dermot Desmond role really requires something that goes beyond protest, that gets into all sorts of corporate and share issues around that. So I understand their point of view. I just think it needs to be talked about more. And listen, we're going to leave it there today, unless anyone in the chat has any questions while we round off. But we've taken you through, I think, what we feel like the highlights of the minutes were. There would be more of it that might be of interest into different people. There is some stuff about the Fairhurst report and the kind of meeting with Police Scotland that's upcoming to discuss that Fairhurst report. So if you're interested in that and the police and the fans, again, it's in the full minutes. And yeah, this rumbles on, of course, and I think you're right, Ryan, to say that more protests are expected. We're also expecting more action or stuff from the collective around the upcoming AGM, which is next month now, and the club will release their annual report. I'm very interested to see what whether the substance of the annual report is different to previous years. It's usually a very glossy PDF full of stuff, and it is full of relevant information. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm wondering if there'll be a bit more this year, and see what comes of that.
I would hope there's more, and I'd hope there's more of an honest reflection on the way that things have transpired, but the big word there is hope. I don't expect, because we've been in this situation before. You go back to even like the 2021 AGM, and even that was glossed over. A lot of the stuff was glossed over at that time with what happened the previous season. It's always about the bigger picture and a more positive outlook on things. So yeah, it's more of a hope than an expectation. But you're just hoping that and I've used the word hope so many times in the minutes, but that's what it is at the moment, unfortunately, and that's probably why these protests are ongoing, because there needs to be more than just hope. There needs to be an expectation that Celtic can change, and the only way they can do that, or the only way it seems as if that will transpire, is if the fans revolt and protest, which has been happening so far, and what is likely, as I said, to continue to occur once Celtic come back from their international break. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. That was quite an eye opener. Those minutes from the meeting. They're all available. They're all there in the public domain. They're on the Celtic website if you want to get your own opinion of it. Don't just take our two opinions for it. Read it for yourself and have and go in and have a read, and then, because it's 10 pages of documents or 10 minutes of statements and words. It's well worth a read, is what I'm trying to say. Long story short, for good or for bad.
Yeah, Hazelfin asking any question about the state of the stadium. It wasn't really addressed. I think they see some of the stadium issues around some of the fan survey questions and the infrastructure of the stadium in there. So I guess that might be more of a fan survey thing, which again, Celtic say will be released later this month. I know a lot of people are talking about the stadium at the moment, and for good reason. I mean, the stadium was built in the 90s. I remember You won't remember, Ryan, but I'm old enough to remember it being built. I was there on the first day it opened against Newcastle in a summer friendly. I was attending regularly as a young boy when it was being built in front of your eyes. So essentially, it was just the north stand that existed and the main stand, of course, and then there was temporary stands behind the goal, and there was construction rigs and cranes and everything when you used to go and see the football. So, but that's a long time ago now. Well, I like to think it was only 5 years ago, but it wasn't. It was 30 years ago now, Ryan. That's how old I'm getting on. But what I'm trying to say is that the stadium was built in the 90s, and there is clear issues with the stadium. And listen, the main stand's been around for longer than that. They did do some work to the main stand, but they didn't fully bring it up to a modern standard when they did build the stadium in the 1990s. So I think there is a lot of issues for a lot of supporters about the stadium and how it's looking, and I think that's fair, and I think that's something the club will need to address. And listen, I think a good point is made about the investment of stadium infrastructure is that yes, it's expensive, but it's not going to get any cheaper. If you look at the next 10 years and the way the economy's trending and the way, purchases of materials is trending, etc., I don't think, the investment in the infrastructure of the stadium is going to get any cheaper over the next decade than it is right now. And so would it not be prudent to spend now or figure out a plan now rather than waiting 10 years when it's going to be even more expensive and there's even less guarantee maybe of UEFA money at that point. So I guess that's just my point of view on it. Natalie McMullen, what happened about Pusey? Pusey wasn't asked about. I'm not sure what's going on with Pusey at the moment. Simpson Pusey, Jemai Simpson Pusey. It's another very strange affair. Ryan, Brendan Rodgers said we might see more of him after the most recent international break, not this one, but the last international break. He was asked about Simpson Pusey before going into that international break. He said we'll see the best of him after it. He's not been seen since then either. And what's going on there? I mean, again, that comes into this idea of, yes, Brendan Rodgers might sign off on all the sign-ins, but is he fully aligned with them coming in the door, or is he just signing off on players because he feels like he needs the bodies,
Yeah, to tick a box exercise, go and ask our buddies down at Manchester City. We need a defender. We need some cover. Bring him up. It's a really strange situation because it's not as if he hasn't played first team football as well. Even some of the players that Celtic were bringing in from Manchester City, they'd hardly played for the senior team. Whereas this one, Jemai Simpson Pusey, played for Manchester City. For Pep Guardiola's started games in the Champions League and in the Premier League and the EFL Cup for Manchester City last season. Now, granted, it was a dreadful season for Manchester City. The wheels completely fell off in that area, and at that time of year, and Guardiola was searching frantically for answers on how to stabilise his team and prevent them from losing and drawing numerous games. But he was still trusted to play in some pretty big games. So the fact that he's not had a look in at Celtic, is there a bigger issue at play here? Is there an issue with the player? Again, you can kind of put it to communication, but then again, there might be some stuff that the manager can't say. Maybe it's just not worked out for the player. It's all up in the air, but it's just a guessing game, and it doesn't help anybody if people are continually guessing about his situation. Brendan Rodgers said you might see more of him. We've seen absolutely none of him. The last we actually heard of him was from his ex-coach and Carlos Vicens, who's the Braga manager, who was talking him up, saying that he's a good young player and he will improve if you give him time. But he's not even had his debut, and we're in, the 10th of October now. He's been here for well over a month, nearly 2 months, and we've not seen any of him. So, yeah, there's question marks surrounding his situation.
Okay, Pinball asking, when is the next fan collective meeting? My understanding is that an invite has been sent out to all the signatories of the open letter, the original signatories of the open letter, to attend another collective meeting next week, I believe. So they're using this international break as well to take stock of everything, all the actions that they've conducted over the last wee while and what their next steps might be. So you will hear more of the collective going forward. I believe that, again, that meeting is taking place at some point next week, and the invites have gone out to that in that regard. So we'll wait and see. If, in regard to when our Celtic next meeting with the collective and any other fan organisations, Celtic did say they were open to more meetings, but I would be very surprised if a meeting is taken by protest groups going forward unless they have a feeling that something substantial will be communicated by Celtic rather than just the same old story that we heard this time, which to me, again, for my personal taste, it was a bit of the same old story. Listen, we will wrap it up. Again, thanks everyone for joining us today. It's been busy in the chat as always. Let us know what your thoughts on the meeting were, on anything to do with Celtic at the moment, what you would like us to cover or talk about going forward too. We like to hear about that. Again, we are guided to an extent by the audience, so if you feel like we're not talking about something that you feel like we should be talking about, please let us know. If you feel like we're talking about something too much and you would like to focus on something else, then please let us know. We tried to have a fairly wide range of stuff this week. As I said, we've covered the fan meeting, we covered the on-pitch stuff extensively, we've covered the youth sides and youth players extensively this week. And as I say, we went into the meetings today. There will be no show over the weekend, of course, so there's no matches. But we will be back on Monday. Tony will be back from holiday too, so lots more to come from the Celtic Way. There's lots going up on the website, actually, probably where we'll be busier over the weekend than on YouTube. We've got analysis. We've got some underlying numbers and the rest of the Scottish Premiership and whether Celtic should be worried about Hearts, etc. We've got some of that stuff. We've got an in-depth piece coming on Sebastian Tenecte. Ryan has been speaking to his former coaches and managers about his journey to Celtic. So we've got lots good stuff coming up on the website for premium subscribers. It's £1 for 6 months to get access to everything. And we'll have all the latest news, of course, as well. Ryan, thanks for joining me. I know you've been busy on the YouTube channel this week, Ryan, so we thank you for that. And again, we'll see everyone next week, and we'll see everyone again next time on the Celtic Way. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Goodbye.